So today we are going into betrayal trauma, and I want to start somewhere that might surprise you. I don't want to start with the adult betrayal, not with the partner who lied, not the friend who turned on you, not the person who showed you the version of themselves that turned out to be completely false. I want to start earlier than that. I want to start with a child, because that's almost always where it actually begins. Picture a child who figured something out really early, not because anyone told them, but because they felt it. That the people who are supposed to be safe aren't always. That love isn't given freely, it has to be earned or managed or performed. That their feelings are somehow too much, or the wrong kind, or just inconvenient for everyone around them. That reaching for comfort sometimes works and sometimes backfires, and that you never quite know in advance which one it's going to be. And here is the thing: this child probably didn't grow up thinking of themselves as someone with a trauma history. Nothing necessarily dramatic happened. There is no single event, no headline moment, just this quiet, persistent gap between what they needed and what they actually got. A parent who was physically there, but somehow elsewhere. Warmth that arrived in bursts and then vanished without warning. Needs that were met on the surface: food, clothes, a roof, but not underneath, not emotionally. An atmosphere where everything was technically fine, nobody said anything was wrong, and yet something was always slightly off. And the child did what children do: they adapted. They got really good at reading the room, at sensing what mood was in the air before they even walked in, at making themselves useful or invisible depending on what the situation seemed to need, at not asking for too much and not feeling too much, or at the very least not showing it, at quietly setting aside the parts of themselves that seem to create friction. This is the ground on which betrayal trauma grows. And this is why, when betrayal does happen in adult life, when a partner deceives you, when someone you trusted turns on you, when a person you loved shows you who they actually are, the reaction can feel completely out of proportion from the outside and completely overwhelming from the inside. Because it's not just about the now. The adult betrayal lands on a nervous system that already has the architecture for this, already knows what it feels like when the person who's supposed to be safe is not. And the response is not just about what happened last month. It reaches all the way back, and it opened doors that were never properly closed. And that is why it's so hard to shake. That's why the shame can almost feel worse than the pain itself. You are responding to the full stack program, my friend. Okay, so what is betrayal trauma actually? Because I think a lot of people use the word betrayal and what they mean is just someone hurt me. But betrayal trauma is something more specific than that, and understanding the distinction genuinely matters. Betrayal trauma is what happens when the source of the harm is also the source of your safety, when the person who hurts you is the same person you love, need, or depend on, when threat is coming from the direction of home. That specific combination creates something entirely different from harm that comes from a stranger. Your whole survival system is wired to pull you towards the people you're attached to when you're scared, towards whoever feels like home. So, when the threat is that person, when danger and love are literally coming from the same direction, your nervous system gets a signal it cannot resolve. Go towards them, get away from them, both at the same time. And the body gets stuck in that impossible middle, sometimes for years. A psychologist called Jennifer Freed spends years researching exactly this. She called it betrayal blindness, the mind's ability to not fully know what it knows when knowing will cost too much, when the person causing harm is also the person you need most for survival, for love, for your whole sense of who you are. The mind creates this protective filter. It processes the information somewhere. The body always picks it up, but it doesn't let it reach full consciousness because what would you do with it? You can't leave, you need them, you love them, so instead you minimize. You find explanations, you convince yourself it wasn't that bad, or it was your fault, or that it will not happen again. And then there is what happens to the attachment itself when betrayal is mixed with real care. Because here is the thing: it's probably not all bad. When someone hurts you and nurtures you in the same breath, when there are genuine moments of warmth and tenderness mixed in with the harm, the bond doesn't weaken, it actually deepens. Unpredictable connection creates the strongest attachment of all. The moments of warmth become more precious, more desperately sought, because you never know when they're coming. And so the person who causes the harm can also be the one you desperately crave for. That's why leaving them can feel like grief rather than relief. Why you can know exactly what happened and still miss them. Why the longing and the anger can sit side by side without either one canceling the other out. And then there is an extra layer when the betrayal comes wrapped up in reality distortion. When the person doesn't just hurt you, but actively tells you that it didn't happen, that you are imagining things, that you are too sensitive, too dramatic, just too much. There is a pattern that shows up in deeply harmful dynamics called DARVO: deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. The person who caused the harm reframes the whole situation so that you end up defending yourself for being hurt. And it works. It works because it goes after the very thing that would eventually help you to get free: your ability to trust your experience, your certainty about what actually happened. By the time it's over, a lot of people genuinely don't know what happened. They start wondering if they really are the problem. That is the wound inside the wound, not just the betrayal of the relationship, but the betrayal of their own knowing. And that is cruel as hell. Please don't do that. I want to sit with something here that I think is one of the most underknowledged forms of betrayal, and honestly, the one that most people are carrying without a name for it: emotional neglect. When people think about betrayal trauma, they tend to think about things that were done: actions, events, the lie that was told, the violence that happened, the secret that came out. But some of the deepest betrayals are about what was never given, what was consistently, quietly absent, the attunement that a child needed and never received, the love that should have been there and was not. And this is not about parents who were monsters. Most emotionally neglectful parents genuinely loved their children. They just couldn't, for whatever reason, because of their own wounds, their own upbringing, their own emotional limitations. They could not actually see them, not the full of them at least, not the inner them, not the child's emotional life, their fears, their sadness, their need to feel that who they were on the inside was interesting and welcome and safe to express. The insidious part about emotional neglect is that it leaves no evidence. There is nothing to point to, no event, no moment you can describe, just a persistent quiet absence where something should have been. And that absence is invisible, which means the people who experience it often cannot fully claim the wound. They tell themselves they don't have anything to complain about. Their parents worked hard, they were fed and clothed, they were not hit. What right do they have to be struggling with this? It's a wound that comes with its own pre-built invalidation, and that is why it is so hard to work with. What emotional neglect actually does, at a developmental level, is interfere with the most fundamental thing a child is trying to learn: that their inner world is real, that it matters, that other people can hold it. When a child expresses an emotion and that emotion is constantly minimized, ignored, dismissed, or met with discomfort, they don't just learn to stop expressing it, they learn to stop having it. They learn to disconnect from their interior, to treat their emotional experience as something to be managed rather than something to actually inhabit. And they grow up with this very specific kind of emptiness. Not depression exactly, more like a flatness, a difficulty knowing what they feel, a sense of going through the motion of life without fully being anchored in it, much more comfortable in their head rather than in their bodies, great at taking care of other people, but remarkably bad at taking care of themselves. People who have experienced emotional neglect often describe not knowing what they need, and not because they're incapable, but because they were trained really young, that their needs were just not the point. They became extraordinarily good at tracking other people's emotional states and adapting to them, and completely out of touch with their own. And in relationships, this creates a particular kind of pain, because they crave for exactly the thing that was missing: genuine emotional attunement, being truly seen, someone being curious about their inner world. But the moment someone offers that, something goes sideways. It feels overwhelming, it can feel undeserved, or somehow suspicious. The nervous system doesn't have a map for being received because no one ever taught it how that feels. Here is what I want to say about emotional neglect as betrayal. Your parents were supposed to see you. Not perfectly, people are human, they have limits, they have their own stuff, but consistently enough that you built the felt sense that your inner world was visible and welcome. When that didn't happen, when the attunement was consistently absent, something wasn't given that was supposed to be given. That is the betrayal. It might not have been intentional, but your nervous system still registered the absence. Your child self still adapted to the deficit that should never have been there. So you definitely don't need a dramatic childhood to carry a wound. Sometimes the quietest absences leave the deepest marks. What does all of this actually look like then when you're living it? Because betrayal trauma and emotional neglect don't stay in the past, they travel with you. They show up in how you move through the world, in patterns that can feel much more like who you are, and you stop questioning them. But they are not your personality, they're just adaptations. The first one is hypervigilance. After betrayal, your threat detection system recalibrates upwards and it doesn't come back down. You become so incredibly attuned to potential danger, reading rooms, reading faces, clocking micro shifts in someone's tone, a pause that's a bit too long, an energy that's changed without explanation. You become so good at sensing what's coming before it arrives. The problem is the scanning doesn't know when to switch off. It runs in every room, with every person, even people who are completely safe, burning through your energy constantly, making proper rest almost impossible. Then there is the fawn response. Most people know fight, flight, and freeze. Fawn is the fourth one, and is the one that betrayal and emotional neglect specialize in producing. Fawning is the impulse to appease, to make yourself as unthreatening, agreeable, and useful as possible to whoever might be a threat, to manage their emotional states before you have even checked in with your own, to become so tuned to what other people need that your own inner experience basically disappears from your awareness entirely. People who phone are the one everyone calls selfless, easygoing, easy to be around, and some of them is genuinely them, but underneath it's often someone who have learned very young that their safety lived in the emotional state of the people around them, who learn to put themselves last, not out of generosity, but out of survival. There is also a self-betrayal pattern that develops in the wake of being betrayed by someone else. A lot of people start overriding their own instincts, minimizing what happened to them, making themselves smaller, excusing what really shouldn't be excused. They find themselves silencing gut feelings they know are right, apologizing for having needs at all, preemptively shrinking themselves so other people don't have to deal with them. And relatedly, people with betrayal wounds often explain themselves compulsively, not to inform, to defend. There is this constant need to justify, to contextualize, to build a case for what they think and feel, as if their inner experience requires evidence before it's allowed to exist. That comes directly from having had their reality contested so many times. They have learned that their perception isn't safe without proof. And then there is the hardest one to see in yourself: unconscious repetition. The nervous system doesn't seek what's good for you, it seeks what's familiar. After betrayal and neglect, the relational pattern keeps pulling people towards dynamic they recognize, even when what they recognize is emotional unavailability, unpredictability, or harm. Not because we're self destructive, but because the familiar at least feels survivable. The genuinely different thing, the actually safe person, the consistently available relationship can feel so foreign it registers as wrong somehow. So at some point the work becomes learning to sit with the distortion of something that's actually good. Relationships are where all of this becomes more visible and most painful on a day-to-day basis because the wound is relational, it shows up most loudly in relation to other people. The first thing that shifts is trust itself. Before betrayal, trust was something you extended fairly naturally, not perfectly, but without the level of vigilance that comes after. After, the very signals that used to mean safety can start to feel suspicious. Someone being warm, consistent, caring, apparently trustworthy. Those things can now actually increase anxiety because the last time all of these signals were present, it costed you a great deal of pain. Your brain updated that model. Warm might be a setup. Consistency might be a performance. And the more safe someone is, the more they accidentally trigger the expectation of a betrayal that hasn't even happened yet. You're just waiting for it to happen. What that creates is this split, a deep hunger for closeness and the deep terror of it at the same time. You want to be known, you want someone who actually sees you, and the moment someone gets close enough to offer that, something in you contracts, finds reason it cannot work, pulls back or pushes away, or actively clings because the anxiety of potential loss become louder than the actual connection you're in. Neither of these is irrational. Both of them are your nervous system trying to protect you, just with opposite strategies. Something that surprises people is how hard it becomes to receive care. Compliments, love, help, support, someone's just showing up for you, all of it. Because receiving means allowing someone to see that you need something, that their presence actually matters to you. And that specific vulnerability, needing someone, having someone matter, it's exactly the position the wound was created in. So the reflex is to deflect, give back, redirect, give lavishly, accept minimally. From the outside, it looks like generosity, but it's actually an armor. And then there is what gets repeated, the relational templates that formed in early life, what connection feels like, what to expect from people, what the rhythms of closeness looks like. Those become the nervous system's reference point, and it keeps seeking what it recognizes, even when what it recognizes hurts. People find themselves drawn to emotional unavailability again and again, not because they don't deserve better, but because available, consistent, safe love can feel really strange, disorienting in a way that the nervous system reads it as wrong rather than just unfamiliar. Learning to receive love that is simply and straightforwardly good. No drama, no working for it, no waiting for the other shoe. It's something a lot of people with these wounds have to learn almost from scratch. It's one of the most underknowledged parts of the whole healing journey. So we've talked about what betrayal trauma does to the mind, to the behavior, to the relationships. Now I want to go into the body because this doesn't just live in your thoughts or in your relational patterns. It lives in your tissues, your muscles, your gut, your hormones, the actual physical architecture of your nervous system. When betrayal happens over time, especially with someone central to your life, your nervous system gets one of the most destabilizing signals it can receive. Danger from the direction of safety, threat where in the face of love. And the reason this is so physically costly is that your threat response and your attachment system fire at the same time and pull you in completely opposite directions. You can't run, this person is your person. You can't fight, you need the relationship. You can't freeze completely, you have to keep functioning around them. So your body tries to hold all three responses at once, indefinitely, partially, and the toll of that over months and years is enormous. Your autonomic nervous system, the one that's supposed to move fluidly between activation and rest, loses that flexibility under sustained betrayal stress. It either gets stuck too high, wired, hypervigilant, unable to fully settle even in sleep, or it collapses into a kind of shutdown that looks like depression from the outside and feels like complete flatness and disconnection from the inside. Neither of those is rest. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, when it runs elevated for months and years, starts damaging systems throughout the body. The immune system gets dysregulated. Autoimmune conditions are strikingly common in people with long-term betrayal wounds. The body's defense system, held on high alert for relational danger, starts making errors, starts attacking itself. Inflammatory conditions, thyroid disruptions, reproductive problems, these are not random. These are often the physical story of a nervous system that's been holding too much for too long. And digestive disruption is almost universal. The gut has its own neural network, the enteric nervous system, and is directly connected to your autonomic state and to emotional memory. Chronic nausea, IBS, that's the gut expressing what the mouth was never allowed to say. The body also holds betrayal in its posture, and it holds it specifically and chronically. The jaw clenches around truth that never got spoken. The throat tightens around anger and sadness that had nowhere to go. The chest compresses as if physically protecting the heart. The shoulders round forward. The belly stays braced, always slightly ready for impact. These are measurable muscle contractions that people carry for years, for decades, until they stop noticing them. Sleep fractures too. REM sleep, which is essential for processing emotional experience and consolidating memory, gets disrupted. The hypervigilant nervous system resists to the surrender that deep sleep actually requires, because at some point early on, when it mattered, completely letting the guard down was not safe. Memory stores differently after betrayal as well. The part of the brain responsible for organizing memory into a coherent narrative partially disengages under extreme stress. So, instead of a clean linear story, betrayal trauma memories tend to come in fragments. A smell, a tone of voice, a physical sensation that arrives with no context attached. Emotional reaction that can feel completely disproportionate until you understand what actually is underneath them. These are the signs of how the brain had to store something it genuinely could not process at the time. And then there is one more layer. When you spend a sustained period overriding your own instincts, suppressing your body's signals, staying functional inside an unsafe relationship, the connection between what your body is telling you and what you are consciously aware of frays. People describe not being able to tell if they're hungry or anxious, not knowing if they're tired or heartbroken, feeling like they're living somewhere slightly beside themselves. The body has been trying to communicate something for so long without being heard that the line develops static. Learning to hear it again, that's a significant part of the healing. We're not just physical. I think most people listening to this show already feel that there is a layer to us beyond what the biology can fully account for. The heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends several feet outside the body and changes measurably in response to our emotional state. Every cell communicates through bioelectrical signals. The meridian system, which traditional medicine has mapped for thousands of years, corresponds to the fascial network, the connective tissue that runs through and holds the entire physical structure. There is an energetic dimension to how we hold experience, and betrayal leaves imprints there just as it does in your nervous system. Let me walk you through some aspects of it, like in the energy centers or chakras, and show you what happens in each one. The root chakra at the base of the spine. This is the center that governs the most fundamental sense of safety, the felt sense in your body that existence is okay, that the ground holds, that people can be trusted at a basic level. Betrayal hits the root with a very specific kind of damage. When the root is disrupted, there is a low-level terror that's almost impossible to locate. It feels like anxiety without a clear cause, like something is being permanently slightly wrong. Financial instability, not feeling like you belong anywhere, or a persistent sense of being on the outside of things. The sacral chakra, just below the navel, the center governs intimacy, emotional flow, the capacity to give and receive. Relational betrayal rewires this center template directly. It might contract, pulling in, guarding against any kind of exposure that resembles the original wound, or it might become sticky, reaching too far, struggling to tolerate distance, recreating closeness compulsively as a way to try to finally get it right. Either way, the natural fluid movement of connection gets disrupted. What replaces it is managed closeness, monitored intimacy. 3 fingers above the navel at the solar plexus, you have your third chakra. Personal power, will, identity, the felt sense of I know who I am, I trust my own experience, I have the right to act on my own behalf. This is where betrayal does its most direct and lasting damage. Because what betrayal does, particularly with gaslighting, is rewire your reality. Someone decided you didn't deserve the truth. They use your trust as a weapon. And that is a direct assault on this center. The self-trust erodes. People describe not knowing who they are anymore, looking to other people's interpretations to figure out what their own experience means. Second guessing everything, not because we're confused, but because the foundation of knowing itself was attacked. The question that haunts this wound: who am I now that my reality was never real? The heart chakra, the bridge between the lower and the upper centers. Love, compassion, connection. In betrayal, the heart doesn't just break, it learns. What I think of as an energetic scar tissue forms here. The heart opened, genuinely, vulnerably, all the way, and experienced catastrophic harm as a direct result of the opening. So, it makes a primal vow: never do that again. What follows is an emotional armor, difficulty letting yourself feel the loss fully, pushing away the people who are actually safe, a kind of quiet heart cynicism that wasn't there before. Energetically, this shows up as a compression in the chest that becomes so chronic it stops feeling like a compression and just starts feeling like you. Breath that never quite expands to full capacity. A wall that has been up so long it dissolves into the background and just feels like the normal shape of being. And the painful irony, the thing that heals the heart wound, is exactly what the heart now fears the most: safe, love, genuine intimacy, being seen without consequences. The throat chakra, voice, truth, the right to name what you experience. Betrayal silences this center in a very particular ways, sometimes explicitly. Don't tell anyone, no one will believe you. More often, through the subtler, longer lasting damage of having your reality constantly denied. You are too sensitive, you are misremembering, that didn't happen. Gaslighting is a direct attack on the throat. It severs your trust in your own perception. The voice that wanted to say, what you did was wrong. I know what I experienced. I deserve to be believed. Gets trained down into silence, or it comes out sideways as symptoms: chronic tightness in the throat, difficulty finding your voice in conflict, literally using your voice under stress. So, the third eye, the sixth chakra, and the crown. The third eye, located in the same place as your sixth chakra, is the center of intuition and inner knowing. The crown is our connection to something larger, to a trustworthy universe, to the felt sense of being held by something beyond the personal. When betrayal comes from someone you believed was genuinely good, a partner, a healer, a parent, a spiritual teacher, a community, it fractures your trust in your own discernment. How did I not see? That question is an attack on the intuitive faculty itself, and the crown can feel completely unplugged. The spiritual dimension of betrayal is precisely this: the shattering of faith, not just in the person, in a universe that could allow this, in a self that didn't prevent it. Here is what I want you to take from all of this. The energy body is not fixed. You actually have 8 energy bodies, but that's for another day. It imprints and it can be rewritten. Those contracted places can soften. The armor around the heart can slowly, with the right support, come down. But it needs direct attention, not just cognitive understanding, not just talk. Work at a level where the imprinting actually happened. Betrayal is one of the oldest wounds in human spiritual experience. It is in every tradition, every mythology. Judas, Loki, the fall from paradise. These stories have survived for thousands of years because they map something every human soul eventually encounters. The moment when someone you trusted completely does the one thing you least believe they could. But the mystic traditions understood, and what keeps showing up in psychology, is that this kind of distraction, when you move through it rather than around it, is also a form of initiation. The self that was built around needing to be loved by this particular person, the self that organized itself around maintaining this particular connection, doesn't survive the betrayal. And as agonizing as that is, there is something in it that is also eventually a release, because the self that formed around keeping that person's approval was never entirely your own. A lot of people describe betrayal as the thing that cracked them open to themselves, that forced questions they've been quietly avoiding for years. Who am I when I'm not performing for this person? What do I actually need? What have I been calling love that love doesn't actually do? What parts of myself did I quietly abandon to keep this intact? Jung talked about the dark night of the soul, the period after the central illusion collapsed, the old structure gone, the new one not yet formed, a time of profound disorientation and not knowing. The mystics describe it not as a punishment, but as a passage, the narrow place you have to move through to arrive at a larger self on the other side. There is a shadow dimension here I want to name, gently as an invitation rather than an accusation. Betrayal often surfaces our own shadow, the part of us that knew something but chose the dream over the knowing, the part that believed their love required self-erasure and offered that self-erasure willingly, the part that kept hoping the warmth would stick this time. I'm not trying to blame you. This is about the material, because the invitation, when you're ready, is to know yourself so completely that it becomes genuinely harder to be deceived. Not because you're defending, because you're present, because there is less of a gap between what you feel and what you let yourself know. Real forgiveness, when it arrives, isn't something you decide. It's the moment when the events stop claiming your energy, not because what happened was okay, but because you finally, completely moved through your response to it. There are three things that happen specifically inside betrayal that I don't think get enough space. This is not trauma in general. These are particular to betrayal, to being hurt by someone you loved and trusted. And I want to get into each one because if you're carrying these, you will recognize them, and recognizing them matters. The first one is the loyalty bind. After someone betrays you, depending on how long you went on, how close you were, how central to your life they were, you almost certainly find yourself still feeling loyal to them, still protecting them in small ways or larger ones. Not telling the full story when people ask, finding yourself defending them when other one criticize, feeling guilty when you say something honest about what they did, going out of your way to make sure you don't damage their reputation, their relationships, their image, even now, even after everything, and the shame around that can almost be worse than the betrayal itself, because from the outside, and from the inside too actually, in the part of you that is angry, it looks like weakness, like you still haven't got the message, like something is wrong with you for still caring about someone who treated you the way they treated you. But the loyalty isn't weakness, it's the other side of the real attachment. You can't love someone for years, build a life around them, make them your reference point for your reality, and then switch that off because you found out who they actually are. The love doesn't just disappear with the truth. It strays awkwardly, painfully, right next to the anger and the grief. And the part of you that still wants to protect them is the part of you that loved them. It just hasn't caught up yet. It might take a little longer to catch up. But what's important to understand is this, that loyalty bind is also part of what kept you in. The same mechanisms that made you cover for them, make excuses, look away from what you were seeing. It's what love does when the evidence becomes unbearable. The mind protects the attachment. The second is what happens to everyone around you. When someone you trusted betrays you, the wound doesn't stay contained to the two of you. It ripples, and some of the most cutting pain in the aftermath comes not from the person who hurt you, but from the people who were supposed to be on your side. And they were not, or not fully at least. The friend who stays close to both of you and tells you that they're staying neutral, the family members who hears what happens and say something like, well, you know what they are like, or are you sure that you are remembering it right? Have you thought about the other side of this? The people who go quiet, the ones who were part of your shared life and simply drift away as if the betrayal were a contamination they'd rather not be nearby. Because each of those responses, what it does, it's repeating the thing that was done to you. The experience gets minimized. You get reality questioned, your pain becomes inconvenient. The people who should hold what happened to you choose instead to manage their own comfort. This is why betrayal trauma so often expands far beyond the original relationship. It's not that the survival is being hypersensitive or can keep things in proportion. It's that the secondary responses genuinely re-wound you. They confirm what the original betrayal first suggested, that your experience isn't quite believable, that the people around you will choose the path of least disruption, that telling the truth comes at a cost. And then there are the people who do come, who stay, who don't flinch, who let you say the ugly, complicated, not yet organized version of it without needing you to have to arrive at the forgiveness or at the resolution. Those people are the ones that are doing something profoundly healing, whether they know it or they not. Sometimes the most radical act of repair isn't a modality or a practice. It's just having someone who doesn't leave when it gets hard to witness. The third one is what happens to the past. This one, I must say, is particularly cruel. And I want to name it clearly because I think a lot of people experience it without understanding what it actually is or why it's so destabilizing. When you find out someone has been deceiving you, whether that's a partner who was lying, a parent whose version of care was really about their own needs, the discovery doesn't just change the present, it reaches backwards, it rewires everything. Every memory that you have of the person now comes with a question attached to it. That holiday, was any of it real? The conversation where they said they loved you, and they seemed so present in it. What were they thinking? Did they really mean it? The moment you thought you were truly known, were you actually being truly seen, or were you being managed? The good things, the warm things, the things that you held onto as evidence that that was real, all of it goes into question. And you can't go back and check. The archives has been contaminated and you have no way to sort out what was true from what was performance. What this does, particularly in the body, is make memory itself feel unsafe. You start to disrupt your own history, not just your judgment about this person, but your judgment in general, your ability to read a situation, to know when something is real. If you couldn't see this, what else have you been wrong about all along? What else is not what you thought it was? That specific question is one of the most destabilizing things betrayal does to a person. Because your read on reality, your sense of what actually is happening around you, is the ground you stand on. And when it gets called into question, everything built on top of it wobbles. Your confidence in your perception, your trust in your instincts, your willingness to commit to anything fully, because look at what happened last time you did. Here is what I want to say about all three of these. The loyalty that you're ashamed of is love. It needs to be honored, even as it's being worked through, and not used as evidence against you. The pain from the people around you, it's real. It's not an overreaction. The wound you're carrying is legitimately being reopened every time someone treats your experience as something to be managed rather than witnessed. That is worth naming and worth grieving separately. And the contamination of memory, the not knowing what was real, that is not permanent. It feels like It rewires everything, but over time, with enough distance, a different kind of knowing comes back. Not certainty about their interior, you'll never have that, but certainty about your own, about what you felt, what you gave, what you chose, and what it cost you. That part of the past belongs to you. It always did, and no one can retroactively reach in and take it away from you. Real healing from betrayal trauma is not a linear process. It doesn't have a tidy timeline. This wound touches the nervous system, the body, the energy system, your sense of identity, and your consciousness. Real healing has to move through all these layers. And the reason I want to talk specifically about vortex healing is that it's the only modality I've encountered that works on all those levels, not one after the other, but simultaneously, all the way down to the root. Vortex healing is a multidimensional divine energy healing art. It works with a specific vortex-like structure of divine energy that is brought in through the heart and which becomes a vehicle for divine presence to manifest healing and transformation. Not the practitioner personal energy, not a general life force, but a direct channel of divine healing energy and especially divine consciousness that moves through the practitioner into whatever is being worked on. This vortex-like structure is an expression of the divine presence, and the practitioner is the conduit. The healing is divine in origin. And what that means in practice is that the work reaches a depth that human effort alone simply cannot get to. What makes vortex healing particularly relevant to betrayal trauma is that it works directly on conditioning. The deep, often pre-verbal patterns, emotional imprints, and contracted states that have been woven into the energy system for years, sometimes over a lifetime, sometimes more lives. Not the story of what happened, not the cognitive understanding of the wound, the actual energetic architecture that holds the wound in place. Vortex healing works directly on these structures, on the contraction itself, the holding, the frozen energy that have been waiting somewhere inside for a place that's actually safe enough to go. And it doesn't just move energy around, it works directly with divine consciousness, therefore, transforming those stuck up places back to the light they originated from. The part of you that learned that the world isn't safe, that love has condition, that you have to manage yourself carefully just to survive, that isn't just a belief or a nervous system pattern. It's a particular relationship between your consciousness and your experience that got locked in at some point. Vortex healing brings divine light into those places directly. It works at a level where the contraction originally formed. For betrayal trauma specifically, this matters enormously because one of the deepest wounds in betrayal, especially when it was chronic, especially when it started early, is the wound to the connection with the divine itself. When the person who was supposed to be your safe ground wasn't safe, it doesn't just damage trusting people, it damages that fundamental felt sense that existence is supported, that there is something benevolent underneath things, that you are held. A lot of people with deep betrayal wounds carry what I can only describe as a spiritual loneliness, a disconnection from source that they may not even have words for, but that makes everything feel more effortful, more isolated, more fundamentally unsafe. And because vortex healing works directly with divine consciousness, there is something about receiving a healing from a source that is genuinely trustworthy, unconditionally available, that has no agenda and no condition, and that is not going anywhere, that touches that particular disconnection in a way nothing else quite does it. It's not a concept you hold intellectually, it's a felt experience of being held by something real. One of the things I find most profound about vortex healing in the context of betrayal and emotional neglect is its capacity to reach the earliest layers, the imprinting that happened before the memory, before the language, before there was any possibility for understanding what was occurring. The conditioning that formed in the body's first experience of whether or not the world was safe. Because vortex works at the level of consciousness itself, it can assess what talk therapy and even most energy work doesn't reach. And it also works on the ancestral dimension directly. Betrayal patterns very often run in family lines. The parent who betrayed you might have carried the same wound passed forwards from their own parents with no language for it and no support to work through it. Epigenetic research now shows that unresolved relational trauma changes how genes express, and those changes pass down through generations. Vortex has specific capacity to work on that genetic and ancestral conditioning. The healing isn't only for this lifetime or for this version of the wounds. It reaches back through the line. That said, no modality does all of this for you. Your participation is irreplaceable. Rebuilding trust in your own perception takes deliberate, patient attention. After sustained gaslighting, the internal compass needs recalibration, and that happens in small moments. Noticing what you feel before checking what you're supposed to feel, letting your body's responses count as information, treating your own perception as a starting point worth taking seriously, even when the habit is to immediately doubt it, and relationship is still irreplaceable for the relational wound. Safe, consistent, attuned connection over time, the actual lived experience of reaching towards someone and being met, of being known and not abandoned for what was seen. That cannot be bypassed. It has to be experienced slowly to become real in the nervous system. What changes with vortex healing, in my experience, is the depth at which all of that becomes available. Not because you skip the work, but because it removes what's been blocking the work from the inside. Betrayal trauma makes you someone who trusted and who was hurt by that trust, and whose entire system, nervous system, body, energy field, sense of self, adapted around making sure that particular kind of pain didn't happen again. That adaptation made complete sense. It kept you functioning. It kept you in the world. But at some point, the survival strategy becomes the cage. The hypervigilance, the walls, the fawning, the inability to receive, the voice that went quiet, the constant self-abandonment. None of this was meant to be permanent. It was survival, emergency architecture, and emergency architecture was never supposed to be home. Healing from this is not about becoming someone who feels things less. It's not about trusting more easily or switching off the things that make you read the room and people. No, it's all about those capacities, which are genuinely gifts, even the painful ones, being in service of your actual life rather than running on autopilot in service of an old wound. It's about coming back to yourself, the self that was there before all the adaptations, the one that's been underneath them this whole time, waiting. Take care of yourselves. If this resonated for you, share it with someone you know is carrying this quietly and doesn't have an name for it yet. And if you want to go deeper, if something in this episode made you feel like you are actually ready to do the work, I'm here for that. All the links are in the description below. And if you want to know more about working with me, come and find me at magicalmara.co.uk. Until next time, remember, the truth of what you are is that you're love and compassion. Be well, be good, and above everything, be loved. Ciao for now. I love you.